Welcome to Voices Against Violence, a Harmony House podcast to educate, empower, and serve as a voice for survivors. We aim to shed light on crucial issues surrounding domestic violence, offer support, and inspire action for change. Join us as we work together to create a community where all individuals can live a life free of abuse.
Welcome back to Voices Against Violence. My name is Kirstyn Walker. I am the Assistant Executive Director at Harmony House.
I'm Charity Jordan-Rex, Prevention Program Manager here at Harmony House. March is Women's History Month, and so we wanted to take some time this month to talk about kind of the struggle for women,
of advocacy and empowerment for the last hundreds of years. For
women's rights in America. And, you know, there's a lot that's happened. Mm-hmm. There's a lot that still needs to be done. But not all of this is ancient history either. And I think it's always good to kind of look at these movements and see, some of these things happened within our lifetimes.
Literally within our lifetimes.
Yes.
In the same amount of lifetime that we can have a podcast. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like going back within our podcast host lifetimes, these things happened.
Yes.
So like you said, we're
not even that old.
So that's what I'm saying. Like this is like, I mean, when you think about like the podcast, it's like one of those things where you think about like the time history between dinosaurs and like the pyramids being built, like that kind of thing. It's like, and from the point where there's podcast, this was also legal. So I'm going off on a tangent. We are going to focus on American history specifically.
Yes.
And just like one note, as I was drafting up notes and I was thinking and researching, there is some language in the way that we talk about this movement that has shifted over time. So for example, when we get into the 1900s and we start talking about the 1970s and the battered women's movement, we know that is no longer the acceptable language that we use. It is what it was called back then. So we are going to just refer to it as the name that it was called. But we're going to start in colonial America. Whew. What a place to start.
I feel like this is good though. Like we're celebrating the 250th birthday of the United States, and so colonial America and women. So the very beginning of this country. And
so in the beginning of this country, what was the domestic violence laws really revolved around the common law, which gave a man a right to assault his wife in the interest of maintaining family discipline is the way that it's worded. And so as you're listening to this podcast, colonial America might feel like a very long time ago. And just consider, like all things throughout history, these are the foundational blocks that we have built our cultural narratives and norms around. So although it was 250 years ago, these are absolutely these themes of ownership or head of household or family discipline or family matters. Like those still show up in these conversations about domestic violence to this day.
Yeah. The remnants of those ideas are still with us. One of the notes, some of the notes I'm looking at, during that time period. So we're talking late 1700 or early 1800s. So the early days of the country. If you were unmarried, you did have some rights, like you could live where you wanted to, you could work. This article says that single women could enter into contracts. They could buy and sell real estate. You could have personal property. So anything that could be moved. So if you could pack it up and transport it, but interestingly, once you got married, you lost that autonomy.
Sure.
Because now your husband,
right,
controls it.
Right.
And so that changed their legal status quite a bit. And which is so interesting that if you're single, you kind of had more freedom.
So that's the starting point. That's where we're going from there. So then in 1871, Alabama and Massachusetts were the first states to criminalize domestic violence. And then around the 1880s, so just shortly thereafter, about a decade later, Maryland does the same, and New York starts hearing cases against marital rape. Now, again, this is the 1880s. It will take another 100+ years until marital rape becomes a crime in all 50 states. So not a crime in all 50 states until 1993.
Okay, say that again.
Yeah, okay. Marital rape became illegal a crime in all 50 states in 1993. Within my lifetime.
Sorry, I'm just sitting here seething.
Yeah, no, for sure.
The 90s.
Yeah. So like the same decade that brought us The Lion King. Like if we just need like a cultural reference moment, right? Like
the 90s, it gave us The Lion King, New Kids on the Block.
Sure.
And marital rape is finally illegal
in all 50 states. Yeah. So some states started earlier than others, but adopted in all 50 states, federally illegal in the 90s.
Also, I would be so curious, I kind of wish I were a historian, like what was happening in 1871 in Alabama? Like who was in charge that they were like, yeah, because that feels so early, forward and progressive. Like, really?
I'm so curious. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. But I am so curious. We do see one of the very first, it's not necessarily a domestic violence shelter, but really like a refuge for women who are experiencing abusive homes in 1875 in Texas. Her name was Martha McWhirter. And she founded the Women's Commonwealth. And so it was a refuge from fleeing abusive homes. And it housed about 40 to 50 women while it was open. So that's 1875. So it's not really credited as being like the first domestic violence shelter, but it was one of the first of its kind, an idea that folks could come together and flee abusive homes.
I mean, that's incredible though.
In Texas.
Of all... I like what has happened in these states, but at some point they were very forward thinking. And then just over 100 years later, Harmony House.
Just over 100 years later. Yeah. Just give us another 100 years. So another notable name from this time period is Frances Willard. 1876, she was a president of the Women's Christian Temperance Union. So something to keep in mind about the WCTU is they argued for the women's right to vote. So the suffragette movement, under the notion of home protection, with their idea really being that, violence against wives was being committed by intoxicated husbands. So they were really looking to outlaw and prohibit alcohol because they saw that as being the reason, what they call the devastation of the home. So while we have, and when I say that these themes continue to come up, we could continue to have conversations around the role that substance use plays in domestic violence. Of course, we know that it's not the cause of domestic violence, but it is a contributing factor, can exacerbate things. It is really interesting to know that they were having these conversations back in 1876 and pointing to women needing to be able to vote in order to, for home protection, they called it.
Mm-hmm. I think it's also worth noting, and I can't let the episode go by without pointing out that the women's suffrage movement really was for white women. So Black and Indigenous women were not a part of this. In 1855, in Missouri versus Celia, an enslaved woman was declared to be property without a right to defend herself against an enslaver's act of rape. So as we are thinking about this timeline of women's rights and women's struggle for equality, that not all women were receiving those rights at the same 100%. Time. So it would, we're talking about, it would be a long time before some of these things happen, but it would be even longer before Black and Indigenous women would also receive those rights. Thank you for bringing
intersectionality into the mix. Yes, absolutely.
But it's all connected, and if we're not all free, then none of us is free. 1869, the first women's suffrage law passed in the territory of Wyoming, which I think is interesting. Like,
I didn't know that.
So, it's interesting that there are kind of just territories and states around the country.
Yeah. Little moments of advocacy wins across the states. Well, and of course it wasn't until 1920 when the 19th Amendment was ratified, which granted women the right to vote, which increased political participation and advocacy.
And that's like, that seems really, I don't know, like that. I mean, that even though that's a long time ago, like that's over 100 years ago now, but that's still, when you say like 1920,
it's not that long ago.
And you figure how much time between the country forming, 1776. So now we're talking,
Right.
you know, almost 200 years before we get to a place where they're like, okay, women, you can vote now.
No, it's a couple generations ago. I think about the fact, so I'm a 35-year-old woman. My grandmother was born in 1919. So she predated the right to vote. So that's my grandma. You know, that's just a couple of generations.
Like when you think of it like
I know.
that, like, oh my gosh. Or the women who were, I think it was the 60s before women could have credit cards. So like my mom, she's, you know, she remembers the time before you could.
Right.
Okay, let's keep going.
The women who raised us are the women who did not have access to those things. So in the 1970s, we saw the start of the battered women's movement, there was a shift in attitude. So as we go back in history, there's really an attitude or a view that domestic violence is a private matter. It is, in the home. It's not meant to be talked about. And this shift in the 1970s really saw it shift towards being viewed as a societal issue and really based in power and control in the way that we understand it today.
Mm-hmm. I feel like, we're kind of taking steps back currently on that. But I think we really have to keep pushing forward the idea that this is a systemic societal issue.
Right.
And the answer and the solution to it is not going to be found in individual homes, but it is in really how we address this as a society.
Well, and it's a conversation we continue to have. Like you said, we feel like we have this conversation a lot, that it's not a private issue. So it's kind of, I see in one instance, this was not that long ago that this shifted. And then in another instance, I'm thinking, and we've learned so much since then, like that in such that short span of time, there has been, I think, a significant shift in how we talk about it. Whereas we're maybe not having these conversations as often, but I think there is more recognition that it is a societal issue based in power and control.
Mm-hmm. I also thought it was interesting. I don't think you had this on your timeline, but it's I think like the early 1900s, before it's illegal everywhere for couples to use birth control.
Oh, sure, yeah. That's so the liberation movement, the battered women's movement, and the sexual liberation movement as well, where birth control became readily available and people were able to make choices about family planning.
Yeah. And you think about how huge that would have been for women. I think the condom was invented and it came out in like the late 1800s, 1860s, somewhere in there. And so I read an article that said once that happened, women started having fewer children because now they had
some choice and autonomy.
So I
know
it's interesting to think about, kind of piece by piece, as women are like, okay, we can vote. Okay, now I can have a choice about how many kids I want to have. What do you think it would have been like for a woman at that period watching these pieces happen, and realizing, okay, now I have a few more options, or,
I don't know. I don't know what it might have
I just
felt
wonder,
like
to watch your life changing drastically. Like each of these things that we've talked about would have been game changers for women.
And I think through like the generational part of it, I think through my mom and her sisters watching me now and getting to see like the things that they didn't even have access to that I have access to. And what is that like for them? I guess to answer your question, what would that feel like? I'll ask my mom what it feels like to see progress being made like within your own kids' lifespan. So the first domestic violence shelters were opened in 1974, the first permanent domestic violence shelters. I know that we had said that there was in Texas in the 1800s, like a refuge for folks. But by the end of the 1970s, there were 250 domestic violence shelters across the country. And then in 1980s, restraining orders became available. And that was nowhere on I just guess I never considered that there was a time before restraining orders.
Wait, restraining orders
Nope, not till the 1980s. Where did those become an option for folks to file against abusive partners?
I am floored by that.
I hadn't even considered to think about that until I went down this timeline rabbit hole and learned that didn't become the case until the 1980s. It never occurred to me that there could have been a time before that.
I don't even know what to say.
I know.
This isn't good for a podcast. There's dead air. It looks like by 1989, all 50 states had enacted civil protection order legislation to address domestic violence.
So it looks like
with further expansion for stalking and harassment in the 90s
with VAWA. So they first started to develop in the 1970s, and then they were in every state by 1989.
It is just incredulous to me that you would have had just this huge demographic of citizens, women, experiencing all sorts of things and not even having the legal recourse, which we talk about sometimes. Like, it's not perfect, and there are lots of issues, and but at least that exists. You can get a protective order. And so I can't even imagine, experiencing domestic violence,
right,
and not having the protection of the law, there not being a protection order. Like, you're just at the mercy of your abuser.
Right. Exactly. There was no path forward, no judicial path forward for any of it. Up until really recently. The 90s saw huge gains for domestic violence prevention and just accountability with offenders with the Violence Against Women Act. So in 1994, the Violence Against Women Act was passed, and it created its supports for responses to domestic violence, sexual assault, dating violence, stalking. It established broad federal frameworks that changed how the justice system treated domestic violence, sexual assault, and stalking. There were new grant opportunities available to support victims. And then the Office of Violence Against Women was created in 1995 to help manage those federal programs and provide technical assistance, which is still operating today and helps us run Harmony House through federal grants.
I think what stands out to me about all of these is that really, and we talked about this in a previous episode, that it's about voice and choice and giving women the full autonomy. And I feel like when we talk about some of these issues and we try to address them, we're not addressing them from the standpoint of, does a woman have a right to have the full autonomy over this choice? And there's so many areas where right up until just a few decades ago, like, women were still fighting to have that full autonomy. And I think if you think about a country that has been founded on these principles, essentially, of power and control, built systems based on power and control, held by men in every sector, all of this feels baked in.
It is baked in. And that's why we have to keep talking about it, right? Because I'm sure there are people listening right now who think, well, that's history. That's so long ago, but it's baked into the systems and the culture. And if we're going to change things, we have to talk about the cultural norms and narratives and stories we tell ourselves. And that part is just, it's part of our identity as a country. We can simultaneously think, wow, how far we've come, and still see the effects of where we've been.
I'm thinking about the current legislation that is going to impact women who have changed their names when they got married.
Yeah.
And that feels like a huge thing to me. Because now you've got to get documents, you've got to pay for that. And it's like, some of this stuff was a long time ago, but there's still things happening
today. These conversations are still happening today.
And the changes have to happen in these systems, which also means that we have to send people to our capitals who understand these systems and are willing to break down these systems, because we all are going to suffer. We're all going to experience more harm, more discrimination if we don't all have the same rights and autonomy.
Yeah. Every individual deserves a life free from abuse.
Every individual. And every individual deserves a right to choose the path for their own life. That the full autonomy. Yeah. And here's the other thing I think about, this might not, I'm sure there's some people who are like, well, it's not such a big deal and whatever. But if the tables were flipped, if it were men who are like, okay, men couldn't have a credit card until 50 years ago or whatever, like people would think that was crazy.
There's no historical context for that though. Like there's never been a time in history where that would even be plausible. Right. So
even that makes me so angry.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's look forward to most recent history.
Yeah.
And a really huge win for just domestic violence prevention, sexual violence prevention. 2006, Tarana Burke founds the Me Too movement.
Ooh.
Yeah. So, and I don't know that people necessarily realize that happened as late as 2006, because I think that a lot of folks became aware of it in 2017.
Yes.
When it totally grew exponentially, just absolutely gained popularity on social media with the Me Too movement.
I didn't know that it started in the early aughts.
Yeah. So Tarana Burke is a community organizer working with youth and started the Me Too movement as a means for allowing folks to feel more connected around sexual violence and sexual abuse. But it really grew in popularity in 2017.
I think we're in a period now though where we're seeing it is still so important and vital for women to tell their stories.
Yes.
To create a culture where women feel safe and empowered to come forward and tell their stories.
Yes.
Because there's so much harm that happens in the dark, in the secret.
Yeah, absolutely. When we treat things like a family matter, right? That just perpetuates harm. This is a societal issue that we need to talk about and have a platform to talk about it.
Yeah. So we have to keep doing it, but there's still a need for it. And I think we've seen over the last several years that if we aren't intentional about not just, using these rights, taking advantage of them, but continuing to push forward, that we could lose some rights that we thought that we've had our entire life.
Yeah, we're gesturing ourselves
our lifetime. But nothing is set in stone, and so we can't rest on our laurels there.
We got to take these notes from these powerful women's history moments and continue moving forward. And I just also think it's so important to say that this movement was so built by survivors, that this is because of the advocacy and the bravery of survivors. I had the total pleasure of watching. So I went to a conference where Tarana Burke was the keynote speaker. No, it was incredible. It was absolutely incredible. And she spoke about the fact that so many of us who work in this field are survivors of domestic or sexual violence. And she said, we do the work because we are the work. And I like, just to this day, it just has so resonated with me. So just so much immense gratitude for the survivors who have created legislative advocacy, have created grassroots movements, and have continued to push us towards equality so that everyone can live a life free from abuse.
At the same time, I think we just want to invite folks who maybe they're not survivors.
Right.
I mean, the onus is always on the people who have experienced the harm, that have to do the heavy lifting. True. And this isn't, women's equality isn't a women's issue. I mean, we're just talking about the rights of humans. This is a human issue. And so if we want to see equality for everyone, if we want to see everyone live a life free of abuse, it can't just be survivors doing this work. It's got to take everyone, which means it takes people who have never experienced abuse. It's going to take men. It's not a women's issue.
No, not at all.
We need men to be allies. So that means you also have to speak out. You have to advocate and push for a better world for the women in your life that you care about. And it takes all of us.
Yeah, it does. Happy Women's History Month.
Happy Women's History Month, Kirstyn.
Hey, podcast listeners. You're invited to be a part of the most iconic event in Springfield, the Purple Party. The 11th annual Purple Party returns Friday, April 17th at the Oasis Hotel and Convention Center for the iconic 1980s themed celebration. Join us as we honor 50 years of hope in our community. Tickets are on sale now. Don't miss this meaningful night. Head to myharmonyhouse.org/events today to learn more.
All individuals have a right to a life free of abuse. If you or someone you know needs help, please call our 24-hour hotline, 417-864-SAFE, 417-864-7233, or chat 24/7 with an advocate on our website at myharmonyhouse.org. Visit our website or follow us on our socials to stay up on the latest news and events. This is Voices Against Violence. Thanks for listening.